So for this one, there's a couple options that we can do. What I'm going to start with is I'm going to get a common denominator. So this guy over here needs a 1 minus cosine on the bottom. Actually, yeah, let's do it that way. Okay, so 1 is really 1 minus cosine over 1 minus cosine. So that's minus sine squared theta over 1 minus cosine. So now I can combine the tops together. So this is 1 minus cosine minus sine squared. And that's all over 1 minus cosine theta. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 1 minus sine squared. So I'm going to rearrange these terms. So like this. I'm going to go 1 minus sine squared theta minus cosine all over 1 minus cosine. Here I've got 1 minus sine squared, so a side note. Sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. Which means that cosine squared is equal to 1 minus sine squared. That. So 1 minus sine squared is equal to cosine squared. So I'm going to take this piece right here and replace it with this guy right here, since they're equal to one another. So that's going to give me cosine squared theta minus cosine theta all over 1 minus cosine theta. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a cosine here. So it's going to be like this. It's going to be cosine theta times the quantity cosine theta minus 1 over 1 minus cosine theta. Now what would be really nice, I'll put little brackets around this, is if this guy right here and this guy right here could cancel. Because what I want is just a cosine up on top. But they don't, because these guys are in opposite places with one another. So I'm going to do a trick here. I'm going to go like this. I'm going to say that cosine theta minus 1 is the same as negative 1 times 1 minus cosine theta. So what you should look at is how I did that. Look, if I take, so let's write down y. Does that work? Look, if I take negative 1 and I multiply it back in here, I would have negative 1 times 1, which is negative 1. And then I would have negative 1 times cosine theta, which is plus cosine theta. And then if you rearrange these terms, which you can do because you have addition in between, and addition is commutative, meaning we don't care the order. 2 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 2. I get this, which is the original. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull one of these out. We're going to go negative 1 times 1 minus cosine theta is equal to cosine theta, this guy right here. So watch what happens. I'm going to have cosine theta times negative 1 times 1 minus cosine theta. And that whole thing is over 1 minus cosine theta. Put that in parentheses just so you can see that now we've got this term and this term cancel. which means that I have cosine theta times -1, which is negative cosine theta, which is what I wanted to have for a solution. So again, the key here is being able to take an order that I don't like cosine -1, and I want it to be 1 minus cosine, and be able to rotate the terms by pulling out a -1. So you see that trick happen, actually fairly often in math. So just note, if I want to change the order, I just pull out the negative. I can only do that changing the order here with the minus. Of course, if it's plus, I don't have to worry about that because you can change the order anytime you want. But if you want to change the order in which terms fall with the negative in between, you just go ahead and pull the negative out.